the New South Wales Labor leader, the opposition leader Chris Minns. There has been quite a development in the Barilaro inquiry this morning. It's happened whilst we've been on air. We're just getting across the detail, Chris Minns, but it seems from evidence given, written evidence given by John Barilaro's Chief of Staff, that he had his eye on this job before he even created it. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, look, obviously explosive revelations, Laura, from John Barilaro's former Chief of Staff, seemingly indicating that the position was created for John Barilaro, a position that he was appointed to by Mr Perrottet and Mr Ayres in New South Wales government. Look, if true, it's a huge revelation. It would indicate that a job was created for Mr Barilaro, a selection process was effectively rigged, and then there's been a month-long cover-up as to who knew what when, and the people of New South Wales haven't been supplied with any of the information. I mean, to put this in context, the person who's made this revelation was John Barilaro's most senior political advisor, where 1 month into this scandal, seems no one bothered asking him what he knew about the developments for this New York position.
Well, we know now, and some of that evidence written in a written submission, it is worth relaying to our viewers. So his Chief of Staff, he claims, Barilaro told him in a conversation, quote unquote, this is it, this is the job for when I get the F out of this place. Mr Barilaro then said, I don't want to go to London, F that, I'm off to New York. Mr Barilaro then responded and stated, I'll get them to put one in New York, that's where I'm off to. Besides the language, what do you think about that? It's pretty clear. What does this evidence tell you?
Well, I mean, it flies in the face of every assurance that we've been given from every level of the Liberal National Government in New South Wales for the last month. We were assured this was independent, it was arm's length from government, it was an honest process, that the selection process was fair and not provided or had any interference from the New South Wales Government. These revelations, which have only just come out in the last few minutes, are completely damning of all of those assurances. And you have to ask, Laura, why didn't anyone bother asking John Barilaro's Chief of Staff what his view was about this New York position? I think the reason he wasn't asked about this latest revelation is because the government didn't want to know the answer. And if Mr Perrottet was fair dinkum about this inquiry and spending a taxpayer money and creating a job for one of his mates, he would have been honest and asked Mr Connell, John Barilaro's senior advisor, everything he knew a month ago. Instead, we've just been met with stonewalling from the New South Wales Premier. I mean, he's really got to front up today and explain what is going on here, because all the assurances that he gave to the media, to me, to the people of New South Wales and to the Parliament have fallen over this morning. But
perhaps Dominic Perrottet didn't know about this conversation between his Chief of Staff.
It seems extraordinary that Mr Connell, who was Mr Barilaro's Chief of Staff, is only making this revelation now, 1 month after Mr Barilaro was appointed as the New York Trade Commissioner in New York from the Perrottet government. I mean, why wasn't he asked about his recollections or his revelations before today? I think the answer is that the government's not fair dinkum about finding out what happened here. The political strategy is very clearly, hopefully this blows over and the people of this state focus on other issues. But this is what happens when governments have been in for 12 years. You can only imagine what they're going to get up to if they're re-elected in March next year.
OK, let me ask you quickly about COVID. You led the calls for the extension of this COVID payment. So when should it end?
Yeah, certainly to get through the winter months. I would urge the federal government and the state government, because it's obviously a 50-50 co-pay arrangement now, to look at the circumstances on the ground with both the flu season and the COVID variant as we head through the difficult winter months. I've been speaking to emergency departments, particularly in Western Sydney, over the last 3 or 4 days, and they are under extreme pressure. For example, 21 senior nurses at Blacktown Emergency Department have quit in the last 12 months, taking with them decades worth of experience because they're under so much stress and strain. We cannot have any situation where you're exacerbating the number of people that are being admitted to emergency departments, because it's not coping at the moment, and we can't make a bad situation even worse.
It sounds like you're talking about the same thing that Dominic Perrottet is talking about: extend these COVID payments till perhaps September, then have a conversation about shortening the isolation period. Are you on the same page?
Look, I think that the second part of your question should be determined by clinicians. We've got Kerry Chan in New South Wales, the Chief Health Officer, who's guided the state through a very difficult period over the last 2 years, in concert with the former Premier Gladys Berejiklian. And I think that the Premier would be wise to take her counsel about the clinical decisions in terms of isolation periods. Obviously, they've got the European and the US example to guide them, and I think that it would be wise that they look to other jurisdictions. So that's a difficult decision to make. It needs to be done with expert advice. But in terms of payments, we cannot have any extra demand on our emergency departments as of this winter season, because it is at breaking point right now. I know I've heard of situations where people have got cardiac arrests, bleeding on the brain, who are waiting in emergency departments without a bed because there's absolute bed blockage right throughout Western Sydney. So anything that increases demand on our emergency departments would be a crisis in our health system, and they're at breaking point as is.
All right, well, I've got you. The fuel excise, the cut in it, should it be extended by the federal government?
Yeah, I wouldn't make that call. I mean, obviously there's got to have to be cost of living measures in the Commonwealth budget, which is to be handed down in the next few months. I think it has to be weighed against whatever else the federal government's going to come to the table with. But, you know, you would note that inflation is rapidly increasing. The numbers out of the US are particularly worrying. If that's replicated in New South Wales or Australia, families will be under serious financial hardship, and governments and political leaders of all political persuasions are going to have to come to the table. What those exact measures are have to be determined in terms of the full suite of the budget, but everyone has to worry about families' budgets at the moment.
All right, I think we just found where your line is. Chris Minns, thanks so much for your time.